Good evening, good evening, good evening. We are so excited to have you all here on this wonderful and beautiful Memorial holiday. I want to first start by wishing a happy Memorial Day to everyone who has a family member who actually served and was unfortunately lost in the U.S. Armed Services. And we want to also extend our appreciation to those who served in the U.S. Armed Forces and sacrificed their lives in order for us to continue to be protected here in the United States of America. So we take today to honor and remember those people and the great sacrifice they made, and and even a little known fact that I learned today, which is that the first Memorial Day was actually organized by the Black community. So we want to recognize our people for definitely always stepping up to honor and salute those who are unsung, and creating a trend in the United States that is still with us today, or a celebration that is still with us today. So, May has been an action-packed month, and we've been really fortunate to talk about everything from tax season to um, uh, news and media, because we've seen so much in that arena, and we certainly did not want to close out May without talking about mental health, because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And we've had several opportunities since we've kicked off the Black intellectualism movement to talk about matters as they relate to mental health. But we have so many profound professionals in this arena that I want to ensure that every time we have a specific day that comes up to highlight mental health or mental health professionals, that we take the time to celebrate and discuss issues that relate to mental health, because until we have more people, especially in the Black community, who feel comfortable speaking up, who feel comfortable reaching out for help, then there's still quite a bit of work to do. And we have so many professionals that are on board to help people reach their fullest potential. And today I am very honored for us to have one of the most awesome LCSWs and therapists that I have met in a long time. I first met Miss Stephanie Broussard several years ago when we were both speaking at an event here in Monroe. And I was instantly like excited by her because she was so energetic, so powerful, and so wise. We connected on social media, and I've basically been able to kind of keep in contact that way. She has made such amazing strides over the years. And one of those things being that I noticed very early on, that she actually worked in the field of helping families who were coping with grief. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. And I always thought that that was very interesting, because I'll tell you that I am the one, when somebody passes away, if you're looking for the one that's acting up, that's me. I'm cutting up. So I always thought, what a courageous woman to specifically work in the area of grief, because I think culturally speaking, we as Black people, because we tend to be very close knit with our families, we deal with grief a little bit differently. And so having a Black grief therapist is so vital, because, honey, I know that I can lay out and cut up when it's somebody that I love. Since then, she has continued to work into different areas and different specializations, and even chiming in to some of the conversations we've had here on the Black intellectualism movement. So I knew without a doubt that I wanted to reach out to her and ask her eventually to come on. And I'm going to say from the beginning, I hope this is not her last time, because she comes with the jewels, okay? And she even has a podcast now. And before we get off, I'll ask that she'll share that information with you as well, so you can hear more of the wisdom she shares. So our topic for today is Mental Health May. You don't have to suffer in silence. And I'm going to start off by reading Miss Stephanie Broussard's biography, and then I'll go ahead and let her share anything she wants to add on. So Stephanie specializes in helping patients and their families cope with illnesses and life transitions. She has invigorated a passion for life, and the pursuit of purpose that she shares at every available opportunity. This is evident in her ability to aid individuals and provide support as they navigate the complexities of life and cope with life limiting illnesses, even in their final days. Stephanie enjoys educating the community and professionals on the importance of communication, managing the needs of their roles, and having difficult conversations. As a motivational speaker and educator, Stephanie engages and challenges her audiences with her witty yet straightforward approach. Her versatility and motivational messaging have afforded her speaking opportunities from national platforms to local community events. Stephanie Broussard is a dedicated licensed clinical social worker, advanced certified hospice and palliative care social worker, and a certified advanced care planning facilitator and trainer. Stephanie serves as the director of palliative care and social work in a community oncology practice and is also a therapist in private practice. So we want to thank you so much for being with here tonight. Is there anything else that you want to share or want us to know about in that bio?
No, I'm just excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming with us tonight. You know, we have some really exciting topics to talk about. And, you know, I remember the last time you actually chimed in on a conversation we were having as a group. And it was when we were talking about trauma as it relates to Black culture and the things we have experienced throughout history. So before we transition out of this discussion tonight, I want to make sure that we get the chance to highlight some of the really valuable points that you shared, or even some thoughts that you have now since that discussion happened a few months ago.
Okay.
So the first thing I guess we'll kind of kick it off in that arena because I'm sure this will kind of take us there. One of the first things that I wanted us to talk about when it relates to mental health, I guess we'll first start off by talking about some of the stigmas and misconceptions about mental health before we talk about Black women. So I would like to ask you, what are some of the most common misconceptions you feel people have about mental health and reaching out for help?
I think the first thing is that people think mental health equals mental illness. And so I think that is the biggest misconception. We have to nurture and take care of our mental health. And a lot of times people assume if we're talking about mental health, we're automatically talking about a mental illness. But just like we are supposed to take care of our physical health by eating our vegetables and exercising and taking our vitamins, we have to also take care of our mental health in the same ways. And for some people, that looks like meditation and prayer and seeing a therapist or even doing things proactively to nurture your mental health. And so I believe that is the biggest misconception. Mental health, everybody has to deal with their mental health. Everybody has to take care of their mental health. So that's the first thing.
And managing, when you talk about the idea of managing, and I heard you talk about even things like having just a practice, or something that you do. Do you believe that also includes seeing a therapist just to have a sounding board, or would you say, just having practices that you put in place?
I think it's both. For everybody, it may not be both. I honestly believe that the best way to go through life is to proactively seek good counsel. So whether that is a therapist, some people go to life coaches. I personally believe in seeing a licensed clinician. But whatever that is, I think it's important because when we only have ourselves in our head and the people in our community, that means we only are able to glean from their experiences or our own. And so sometimes we, show up and present ourselves in a way where we're fear of judgment. We fear what people will think of us. We fear people's interpretation of our circumstances. So we don't even show up as our whole self sometimes in our close-knit circles out of fear of judgment. But when you have a safe space where there is someone trained to clinically help you process your day or process what current circumstances you're in, and you can be your whole self without presenting a figure or a person, that's freeing and it's liberating. And I think it helps us to really better navigate life.
I love what you said when you said sometimes we don't show up as our whole selves, even when it comes to talking to our friends and family, because we fear people will judge us. And I wanted to repeat that because that is such an important and profound statement to make, because there are so many times when we'll have people who will say, well, you can always talk to me and I'm always here to listen to you. But it is absolutely true that it does only go so far many times because in addition to being judged, we don't want to disappoint people. You
Right.
know, especially if people perceive us as being, you know, the image of strength or the smarty one or the witty one or the one that's always smiling. It can be very uncomfortable to have people who have a certain perception about us that we are exhibiting some feelings or some concerns or even just need a sounding board. So, you know, that was a really great one that I feel like we definitely needed to hear.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think I'm
so I
sorry, I didn't
wanted
mean to
to
cut you off.
ask you.
I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say that also, I think part of it is that in our community, we carry our weight. So the last thing we want to do is put our weight on someone else. So sometimes we are afraid to allow other people to see what we're carrying or share with them what we're carrying because we like, well, my sister got her own stuff or my homegirl got her own stuff. So why would I give her mine, you know?
You know, and it's so funny because there's such a common phrase that we hear, like, you know, especially as we get older and we're raising families and things like that. I feel that we definitely become more reclusive as Black women because that's exactly what we think and feel. Is that if that person already has their own things to worry about, do I want to add to that?
Right.
And so you're absolutely right about that. My next question is, what are some practices? I heard you mention like yoga and things like that, and I know we can come back around this in the future as well. But what are some things that you recommend for us to maintain positive mental health, and not just, I guess we could say almost as a preventative method, I guess you could say,
Mm-hmm.
or as in to both prevent ongoing issues and to help us manage our day to day lives. So, what are some things you recommend?
So I think there are some general things. But first, I would say is that there isn't really a one-stop shop or one solution that works for everyone because we're all different. And so what gives me joy may not give you joy. What gives me peace and comfort may not be the things that give you peace and comfort. For example, my husband is a worker and a mover. What he could be outside in that garage building, nailing, and be having the time of his life. Whereas you put me out there, I'm mad. Let's speed this thing up. I don't want to be out here. So what gives us the comfort and release that we need may look different. But I think some general things are, you know, of course, I believe in mindfulness and meditation as a practice. I think it's really important to slow down and try to center ourselves and take some time to take in what we're actually feeling. What are we actually observing and hearing and seeing? But then I also believe in prayer because I'm a person of faith. And so whatever you feel like you need in order to get to that quiet space. But also I believe in journaling because I think there's a great outlet there.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think, you know, there are a lot of different things that can be used, whether it's just using mindfulness and breathing if you're not a prayer, or maybe you enjoy music and you're able to get to a deeper sense of self and center while listening to music. Also, I think it's really important to have a safe space, as I mentioned before, to talk, someone, an outlet. And also, when I mentioned journaling, journaling doesn't always have to look like writing on a piece of paper. Journaling can look like voice memos. It can look like recorded videos. It's whatever you need to have an outlet. And I also firmly believe in that practice of gratitude. And so that whereas you were really intentional about expressing feelings of gratitude throughout your day or maybe at a particular time in your day, which really helps because there is a scientific fact that the practice of gratitude can change your brain wiring a little bit. So I firmly believe in gratitude.
I think it's so interesting. What you said at the beginning was basically you're saying know what your hobby is and make sure that you're making time to enjoy that. I was thinking about what you said at the beginning, saying that your husband likes working with his hands and enjoys being outside. While for you, that's not how that
Right.
goes. But there are things that you enjoy as well. And so what I hear you saying is, because believe it or not, I've heard people say, I don't know what my hobby is. I don't
Yeah.
know what my talent is. And so a lot of it I find is because people have not necessarily made time to really explore their their leisure activities or to try to figure out what you like and what you don't like. So
Yeah.
what I think what you said is so important because I believe in the power of journaling and I actually teach classes on journaling because that's actually kind of how I got. That's not even how, kind of how. That's absolutely how I got
Oh
into the
wow.
realm of writing. So For me, that's what's always worked. But I know that there are also other things people enjoy, and I know that there are other hobbies I enjoy as well, like cooking,
Right.
and eating. So,
Right. And you know what? It can look, and I think part of what happens is that people are used to just doing what other people have said, have given them relief or given them some peace and comfort. They're used to hearing people say, take a bubble bath or go get a massage.
hmm
But really, if we're going to be really honest, self-care is not the frou-frou stuff like bubble baths and
yes,
vacations, and it is setting
yes,
adequate boundaries. It is
yes,
removing yourself from toxic situations. It is
yes.
advocating for yourself. So all of those things help to create proactively create a healthy mental health.
I think what you say is so interesting because when you name what you call the fruitful things, those are things that require you to actually have to get like separate yourself and spend money and carve out time when the management of mental health, it sounds like you're saying to me, has to be something that is a part of your daily habit as
Oh
well,
yeah,
right?
for
And then
sure.
you have those those bigger measures that can be occasionally like taking that time away. But would you say that we should not allow ourselves to get to the point where the big things are a necessity in order for us to not crash and burn? Because I think
I
that
think
that's
it's
a thing we see a lot.
I think it's hard to say. I would love to say I think we shouldn't let ourselves get there, but the reality is that we're human, having human experiences, and life happens. And so, although it's great to have all these proactive things in place, sometimes life circumstances come. They come hard and fast, and you do need some, major methods to try to recenter yourself. And so, whether you even have some great tools in place, sometimes you just need to recalibrate. Um, and so even the nicest cars sometimes have to go in for work. So it's important that even when life circumstances come, there's no way to say, I will be ready for everything and anything that can come. And I think that is part of the challenge in our community is that we think that in order to be 100% ready and able to handle life as it comes, we have to be on guard. And so, or our faith has to be super strong. And if we are impacted by life and the circumstances, then something about that says that we're weak and not strong enough to manage. When in reality, it's just life is happening.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And so when we think, so I would like to go. I guess we'll go dive into the component of Black women in
Okay.
because while I believe that being a woman is demanding, period, I don't think we can deny that. The experience of the Black woman is very different for so many different reasons, and I've shared that. It's the basis of why I work Tricked, which is about the trauma we've experienced so often. Um, it is so much of what's going on in America's current climate, a climate that has not really changed throughout history. To be honest with you, even as we're talking about the Tulsa race riots right now, as a mother, um, I felt particularly emotional last night watching the documentary, and it's just kind of being like almost like this cloud that's just there, as I think about us dealing with the fact that this event happened 100 years ago, and we're in a place where still, as a Black mom, I have to wonder, is my son going to be safe? Is my family going to be safe? As a Black woman, are there going to continue to be new doors open for us that we've been fighting to see open for a long time? So I would like for us to kind of talk about Black women, Black mental health. What are some common things that you see? What are some things that you think contribute to the increased number of Black women that have mental health issues? And we'll kind of just keep digging from there.
So I first think it's that, Superwoman Complex. Two of my partners at our practice, Latoya and Mache, do a beautiful job. They have this program where they review the Superwoman Complex. And really what it does is break down the idea that a Black woman, we have been taught to be strong. We have been taught to carry the weight of our families and our community. And we have to be the one to avenge everyone. We are the ones who show up in these spaces and have to carry all of these loads. and was expected to do it with a smile and a joyful spirit, and often at the expense of ourselves. And so I think what I feel like happens is that we've taken some of the characteristics that we've seen modeled for us, whether it's with our grandmothers or our mothers and the generations before us, who had to push through and almost overextend themselves in order to exist and persevere for their families. But what we saw was them do all of this, and they didn't show us how they cared for themselves. They didn't show us how they emotionally nurtured themselves. They just moved through life and existed and took care of their families. And we didn't see how they stepped away. We knew they maybe went to church. We knew they prayed. We knew they leaned on the Lord. But we didn't see the practical applications of what does that look like when I am overwhelmed and I'm crying out to the Lord, and maybe I don't hear him, or maybe I don't feel him. And so what happens is that I think we as a younger generation, without the awareness of like, what do I do in those spaces, kind of just started to do the same thing. We're gonna put all the weight on, and we almost like fake it till we make it. And we've been taught that that's what faith looks like, is that we move despite adversity. We move, and we don't have to have an outward emotional expression. And so it's taught us how to carry all of these things at the expense of ourselves. And that's not healthy.
Unfortunately, I don't feel that we talk about this thing with history. If we really look at the way history was set up, our people did not they did not have the opportunities to speak up. Our Black women did not have room for complaint. They did always feel that you had to put on the face of strength and courage, because if not, the weakest one could be if we go all the way back, sold by master. You could be beat, you could be abused, so you had to appear strong. You had to appear that you could handle it. This mindset, in my opinion, continued into the early 20th century, because it was also the idea of looking like you were the one that could get selected for a husband, right? Because that was also supposed to be a thing that signified you were worthy, is if you could show that you could manage the family and cook the meals and iron the clothes. And a Black woman always had some type of tiny hustle on the side, ironing clothes for the neighbors or washing clothes on the scrub board, and kept a sock full of balled up dollar bills for a rainy day.
Right.
But she had to show that she could manage all of this. And I think that because when we go back, a couple of episodes ago, when we did we talked about the Devil's Punch Bowl in Mississippi, and our guest was talking about how her grandmother never shared the story about her experience of getting hosed by the police, and they were locked up in a jail cell and where they were fed laxatives, and it's very, very graphic, and it was just a horrible experience. All of those years, her grandmother never talked about it. And I think about the times that even now, like, we hear stories about our grandparents, especially when we hear these conversations now where people are like, why don't relationships stay together like they did back in the day? Well, your grandmother was worn thin, okay? and then we usually hear like all these just traumatic stories of things that Black women experienced or went through and couldn't leave, couldn't dream big, couldn't have her own ambitions, because she was really tied to whatever her family needed. She was tied to whatever time she lived in. If Black women had any rights, there were just so many things. And so we are having to learn, in my opinion, more things now about what Black women went through historically, because they never really did talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of unlearning that our generation has to do, because I dare not speak against or make it look like the power or tenacity or resilience that our ancestors had was something to be ashamed of. I dare not say that. Yeah. But what I will say is that for a lot of the women who've come before us, what we saw was maybe because of the weight of the trauma and not being able to speak and know how to process all of those feelings. If I just tuck it away, then I don't have to feel that, because what is, if they were to bring it up and they didn't know what to do with the emotions, they had to keep pushing. And
Right.
so we even see that in our communities now sometimes where the weight is so heavy that we'll tuck things away and not talk about it because maybe we don't know what happens if we bring those things up. Can we handle the emotions when they come? And so in my mind, that's kind of what I envision. Some of our ancestors are like, they don't talk about the hard stuff or talk about those difficult things because what happens when the emotions come?
Hmm. I think to myself sometimes, what would life have been like if we would have been able to just sit in the room with our grandmothers when they were younger? If I could take take a version of myself and kind of teleport back to seeing my grandmother stressed out with 11 kids and just give her a hug during a time when nobody else did.
Yeah.
You know, I think the reason that we as Black women are able to catapult and move forward and continue to discover, evolve, and grow and take control of things is because we don't have to deal with things the same way that our ancestors had to. And because of the things that they experienced, we now have the room to grow and
Oh, yeah.
evolve and to take control over it. And so what you said is so true about what it was like. But I think that there's also a lot that we do have to learn in this age about resilience, what resilience looks like. Because that is one of the most amazing things about our ancestors is, and I think that ties into like, so let me ask you this question. Do you feel that what we feel is coping mentally has changed over time because times have changed? You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. I think when we think about coping, I think we have a choice to think about coping, right? We have the ability to say, I want to choose to cope. Our ancestors had to choose to survive. So those are two different dynamics, right? And so some of the things that we see and we're talking about what, our grandmothers or our great grandmothers or how they moved through life, we don't see coping because they were moving towards survival. We are gifted with the opportunity that in general, except for being Black in America, but in general, we have the opportunity to know that our survival is not in question for most of us. So we have the opportunity to focus on coping and feeling happy and feel enjoying life and, living our blessed life, where they have to focus on survival for not only themselves, but also their family.
I love it. I love that. I love that. I'm typing what you said and be like, what you doing? I love that. I wanted to make sure to share that. Our ancestors had to choose to survive, and as a result, we now get the chance to focus on coping, and that's so amazing and so important. And so, if we fast forward now to Black women, and I would like to talk about the millennial Black woman. Um, who oddly, like when I sit down and calculate things, we tend, okay, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but let me share this. I feel as if we tend to work almost as many days as our ancestors did, yet we are not always as productive. Um, how do you recommend we break those cycles? And I'm gonna share. I'll share the space from when this comes. I remember when I was in the classroom and trying to do what I did as a writer and speaker, and I was just turning my wheels sometimes throughout the school year because I was so exhausted. And if I was making a teeniest step, like, oh, I filled out this piece of paper today, it was like, yay. It wasn't until I came to be where I was just solely working on writing where I really got the chance to see my productivity go to new levels. And I really felt that it was because I was allowing myself to finally get rest. Can you share some tips for Black women to break the cycle of feeling that we have to overwork or constantly work in order to feel productive?
Ooh, that thing's twofold as an overworker. I think there's more there. So let me start with the more first, and then I'll come back, hopefully back. I think part of it is that because it goes back to our worth, right? In society, it is we start with the assumption that our product is not as good as the others. Right. And so part of that leads to us feeling like I have to be twice as good, work twice as hard in order to get a similar product, which is actually not true, right? We are of value. We have the same, and if not sometimes better skill sets, but our perception can sometimes look different. So I think that's kind of where that starts. And I think that starts early when we're little. I think we're taught you have to work hard, you have to, give it your all. I think that is what we're taught. And so that comes in a little bit, and we're indoctrinated with that early on.
We are. Yes, we are.
But I think the answer to that is also we're in a hustle. I mean, not answer. Another part of that is that we're also in the hustle culture, right? Where it's grind hard. I'll sleep when I'm dead. I have to make these coins when I can. And even we're churchy. The Bible says we got to rise early, right? You don't work, you don't eat. And so I think if we add all of those existing narratives and then we talk about wanting to be productive, it creates this idea that we got to work all the time, that we have to work, we have to labor in order to be valuable. Having said that, I think part of what we have to also understand that all work is not good work, and that all being busy is not always working. Like, we can be busy, but that doesn't mean we're doing the work that we need to be doing. And I think that's what people want to look busy. But sometimes if you're working and you're working towards a goal, that's one thing. But if you're just being busy because you got to look like a hustler, you got to look like you're busy, then why? Like, what are you trying to prove? What narrative are you trying to sell? And why is it important? So I think to answer that, we have to be reflective about why are we doing what we're doing? Are you working because you have to? Are you working because you need to? Like, you have to provide for your family, and this is what's required to work, and to be productive, like, and to meet that financial goal that you have, so you have to work? Or are you just trying to be busy? Because also, I believe it's easier for a lot of us to be busy all the time, because if we slow down, then we have to sit with our mind and our thoughts. And that's what we don't want to be.
And deal.
Okay? That's what we don't want to be. We don't want to be in that space where we have to deal with these negative thoughts and we have to deal with our perception of ourselves. So if I stay busy, then my mind won't slow down.
Yeah. What I heard you also say, in a sense, is about self-acceptance. You talked about busy work versus productive work. So I hear you speak a little bit about self-acceptance too, and what we're looking like to others. And so I want to ask you another question. How much do you think social media has influenced mental health? And and what do you need to tell us about breaking the grip that it has on us?
So first of all, competition is the thief of joy, or comparison is a thief of joy. And so what social media has created is constant comparison. You see these people and you see their lives, and you are comparing your life that you see every moment of to this snapshot of people. Like, for example, I got these beautiful little boys and this handsome husband, and we take really great pictures as a family, but you don't know it took us 27 minutes to get this one shot because these little boys won't smile, the little one run all over the place and he don't want to sit down, and the daddy barely smile to or talk. Listen, you don't know all of that. You don't know all you see is the beautiful product that I share with you. I also don't share with you when my house is upside down and when the kids swinging off the chandeliers, or when I've had a horrible day. Maybe I might share when I've had a horrible day. But, like, you know what I'm saying? You don't see all of those things. And so we're trying to build a life for ourselves, and looking at ourselves, and we see all these negative, harmful things to ourselves about our lives, when we're looking at people and how they're moving through their life, when we don't have the whole story. You're looking at your friend that's balling, not knowing that she's lonely. You're looking at these people who look like they have a great relationship, not knowing they're experiencing domestic violence. You're looking at these people who have all these great ideas and perceptions that they present to us without the reality of where they really are. So then you beat yourself up about the life that you have, that you actually blessed with, but it just don't measure up on pictures. And so I think social media has created this. Actually, Stephen Furtick, like 2 weeks ago, he preached about, I wish there was a way to just remove myself from the scrutiny of from fighting for the perception and the scrutiny of others. And he put a still on his Instagram, and it literally said the unfollow button or remove likes, the validation on Instagram. And I think that speaks so much to what we do, is that like we're praying, asking God, or we're trying to seek the validation for ourselves emotionally and trying to get over all the emotional things of why I don't like myself, or why do I need people to make me feel better. But then we have all of these social media things, which really are just external validation. So if somebody don't like your picture, you think I got to be ugly. No, sis. Maybe people just the algorithm that show people your picture. But now you spent 2 days not going outside. You sad because you think you're not attractive. But what do you think about you?
And I think it goes even deeper too, because it has gotten to the point where even with the algorithm of our cell phones and these mics, there are a lot of people who seek social media for therapy. And I literally had to tell somebody one time, do you know that Facebook has a whole microphone listening to what you said? So when you open that phone up and it pops up with a quote, it is not the Lord. It is the mic. Okay. I need you to go talk to somebody for real and allow them to help you sort through your legit feelings before you make a decision based on what the internet says.
But you know what social media has done though is the great thing about it is also the bad thing about it. Is that it's created a sense of community.
Right.
But it's also a false sense of community. Right. For some people, it connects them and allows them to be connected to people that they would have naturally connected with and allows them to maintain those relationships. But really, it's not the community that you need for some when you're in a difficult space. Because I think it's trying to fill a void when we need real human connection. And that's not it.
I'm sorry. And I think that's kind of where my mindset comes from, because I definitely say during the pandemic, that's when I got onto TikTok and started sharing Black history and Black culture and all this other kind of stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is one of the nicest places I've ever been. But I've also seen the other side of it, where there have been people who have been trolled and even just seeing people who have transitioned from being just an ordinary person when they first logged on to now they are heavy in makeup and heavy in this and heavy in that. And so my concern is that when we talk about, and that's kind of digging us into a different area, but the teen suicide rates that we've seen go up, the increase in depression during the pandemic. I know that social media has been really good, but I think that it has maybe also put us in a place where the comparison mindset has increased. And so how do we get people to filter between what is good for you using the World Wide Web mentally and what is not good for you using the World Wide Web?
Listen, it is as simple as, if I go on this page or when this person posts, what does it make me feel? For I have people in my family that I do not follow. They are hidden. When I say I couldn't see their post if I wanted to, I try not to block my people, but I will do that if I have to. But what happens when I see this person's post? I don't care if it's LeBron. I don't care if it's a superstar. If there is something that emotionally happens to me when I see these posts, you go. You can, just like you can control your timeline. People are like, oh, it's so negative. Not mine. They gone. They gone. They're not there anymore, because that's how I protect my space, which is also my social space, my social media space. I got my little trash accounts I look to sometimes, but I have to go search for them. They're not going to pop up in my feed, and that's how you protect your mental health. That's proactive mental health awareness. For example, you know me, I'm a social advocate. I believe in avenging and advocating for my people. But having said that, Sean King, not on my timeline. I have to go search him out when I want to, because I can only handle so much Black trauma. My brain was not designed to take all of that in all the time, and it emotionally affects me. Yes. So I'm not going to do that every day.
Yes. And I think it's so important to have that conversation because I have heard like we really downplay the intake, but this phone is right here. And we spend more time than we think. And the access is just so automatic, right? And so when people are saying you feel frustrated or you find that there are personality changes, sometimes I think to myself, like, how much time have you been spending in this world? Or even watching the news and television where we are intaking a lot. Now, I'm a person that actually processes quite a bit of news and media, but and it's really just because I write. That's what people don't understand. I'm up at like 3 in the morning, like. But when I'm taking in more than I'm able to funnel out, I realized then that I need to take some time back. And I used to deactivate my social media accounts. The only reason I haven't recently is really just because I end up doing so much business in recent months with it. But I've already said that in the fall, I plan to do my 60-day break from social media just because I do find that even if I don't verbalize it, all of these things do still affect us internally. They affect the way that we sleep. They affect our day-to-day habits. And even in some cases, they really affect how we interact with people. I think even if we don't realize it, it perhaps affects the way that we engage with people. So I really wanted to have a therapist talk about how much social media really does play a role in our mental health, because I don't think that we talk about it enough. And we address the fact that we've seen this increased suicide rate in our kids. We've seen an increase in depression among teens, but I believe that it also affects our adults as well.
Yeah. And I think I want to speak to the teens specifically. I think what happens is that just like adults, teens need validation. And in a society where for them, social media and their phones are their world. Like I had a client, I was working with a family, and the dad was like, well, we took our phone for 30 days. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, what was the goal of that? And they were like, to teach her to be responsible. I said, okay. And I said, so here's what I want you to kind of process with me. For a teenager, their phone is how they maintain contact with their community. It is the social media world, right? Mm-hmm. It is their connection to everything in their life. Half of them, if they using a little app, what's the thing called? The school app is on the cell phone for check-in. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for you as an adult, what would it feel like for me to say, you don't get a cell phone for 30 days? What does that feel like? And they're like, well, she didn't understand responsibility. I said, okay. I said, but what would you feel like if I said, you don't have a cell phone for 30 days? And he was like, well, I couldn't do that. I need to handle my business. I said, you need to be connected. And I think what we forget sometimes as adults is that, not that I'm saying don't discipline your children, listen, because my child's going to get disciplined any day now. Stay on the YouTube. The YouTube. So I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that we have to just be aware that for them, the cell phone is a different part of their reality than it is ours. And for us, a lot of it is. Because listen, I go crazy without my cell phone. I will turn around and leave this cell phone at that. I will come right on back. But it is such a big part of their world that when things happen, whether it's social media bullying, whether it is, they missed out on something on an event via social media, or really the validation, they don't get that validation from social media, it affects them. And so we have to make sure that, number one, we are pouring into our children before they leave home. We want to make sure that they are almost overwhelmed and overcome with the validation that we give them, so that they're not always seeking out external validation.
Yes.
We want to teach them how to validate themselves. My children, my boys are 9 and 3, but we do affirmations in this house because I tell them, you may walk out and you know what the world is going to say to you, but you don't know how to affirm yourself. And so if we can equip them with those skills, then they're more likely to still, although they will still be impacted by all the external things, maybe not as much. Maybe it won't have as much of an impact.
Yeah. Okay, so this is my question to you then. If we say that, the cell phone has to come in order for that to be the lesson, as parents, would you not say that it is then our response? And see, I think this becomes the tripping point, that if I take that cell phone away, I then must fill in those gaps of cell phone time with meaningful activities and meaningful time, like checking that scheduled notebook to make sure you have your information there. If you're not doing social media, or we at home doing activities together, my son and I, we know on the YouTube channel we have different things we do. We eat. This summer we have some of our little workshops we've done at home, some of our arts and crafts activities and things like that. And one of the reasons that I engage him that way is because I am a parent who does not believe in spending a bunch of time on YouTube or the internet. And so I'm trying to ensure that I limit that this summer. So what I'm asking you is the issue quite often that we pull away that gadget, but then we do not supplement it with meaningful things that can really help to strengthen our children and strengthen our relationships and our families.
So you hit the nail on the head. I heard somebody say it is like, think about, and I don't want to be dramatic, but think about it this way. It is like isolation. You are literally isolating them. If you take them away from what connects them to all of their world, and then you do nothing to connect with them, nothing to replace it, you didn't punish them from the phone. You've isolated them from their world. You haven't done anything to connect with them, anything. And I think that's why our parents, like, you take the phone from them, but then what do? Do you put your phone down and connect with them? What do you fill the gaps? Mm-hmm. And I think as parents, sometimes the harsh reality is that, it's okay for our kids to have their electronics, because then that fills the space. We don't got to sit and talk to them. We don't have to, do all this parenting. You don't have to, it's just let them, the TV babysit them. Listen, I am one where I would be completely honest. When I've had a really hard day, when the world has come in, I'll come in, I tell these boys, I love y'all, let's eat, and we'll all have a device.
Right.
And I will look back and I'll be like, I didn't handle that well, but maybe I was emotionally fatigued. I didn't have the words.
Right.
But I think it's easy to do that. Right. I know they ain't gonna tell nothing up if they sitting there watching the devices, except that little one, he might do a little. But you know what I'm saying? And so I think parents, we don't want to do anything that's going to require us to do work. Like my son, we have the big journal. I wish I knew the company's name, but and it's literally a daily journal that is a journal prompt, and we do our affirmations, because I think if we don't model for our children what it looks like to be emotionally well and emotionally whole, mm-hmm. and operate in true mental health, they don't know. Mm-hmm. So all they do is see us with our devices and with our things and with our nice accomplishments, but they don't have any real skills to move through life. And so I think that's something that our generation has to do different than some of our parents. When dealing with adversity, we have to be able to say, hey, and this is a conversation me and my 9-year-old will have. I would say, mommy had a really hard day today. And, I really wish I would have handled some things better. Or I really had a really hard day. My patient, it was really sad. And so I'm feeling a little sad. And so, so that he understands that I have different emotions and this is how I handle them. Otherwise, he'll feel all these things and have no idea what he's supposed to do with the emotions when they come.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. I like that. That's, as they say, that's good eating right there. I like that. And I think it's important, especially for our boys, because it seems that our boys tend to have a little bit more of a difficult time understanding what to do with their emotions. And I think part of it is because it's just been ingrained in them, over the years, that they're supposed to have this strength. And I believe this is just my mindset. I don't care what we say. There are certain things that have just been a part of people for so long. If we believe that things come second nature, if we believe that if you put a kitty litter box out, a cat just starts using it, then, and it's not to say we're a cat, but if this is what we see happen in animals, we've watched it. If we as humans as well are identified as animals, right, there are certain things that over generations and time just become a part of us. And it seems with boys, even if we as mothers teach them it's okay, hug them, love on them, I found that with my son, I still have had to dig with him a little bit to get him in an okay place to express what things concern him. So with our boys in particular, I enjoyed hearing that, because I find that it is so important that we remain emotionally open to our sons, because many of them do have a more difficult time being open enough to talk to us about what their concerns may be.
Yeah.
And sometimes we think that's okay because we think that means they're fine. But as I was sharing in the conference last week, I was telling our educators, a star-studded student does not mean a student that's doing well mentally. A student that's always quiet does not mean a student who is not having problems, and it does not mean a student who is. And that we have a responsibility to ensure that we're looking at our children, our coworkers, and people we come across on a day-to-day basis from as natural of a standpoint as possible, without our assumptions about who they are based on what we've been programmed to think about people, which is looking nice means you're doing good, money means you're happy, good grades means you're smart. Like that's not the way that things actually go. So with our sons, just because they don't say anything does not mean that they don't have emotions they're not talking about. So I appreciate you making that comment. And I know I kind of went a little bit over here and over there, but it just took me to several different thought processes that brought me back to that same point. And so I have another point I want to definitely address with you. It's 8:05. That's just how fast it goes. So if you have a few minutes, we'll talk a few minutes longer. You work in particular with patients who are in their final days, and that, which I'm sure means that you also have to deal with families as well during this time. So grief. The pandemic has been such a long and hard experience for a lot of people. And I do not feel that the grief that surrounds the pandemic has been discussed enough. I think we've talked about it and we felt bad for people, but losing a partner that you've been married to for 20, 30 years, which is something we saw several times, seeing children lose their parents, which is something we've seen, seeing parents lose their adult children, even some young children, seeing students who lost family members. Um, that's a very, very hard thing to go through. And even the medical professionals. So you may have to address that from a different standpoint. I don't know. But I was like, wow, that's kind of like a whole different direction. What would you advise for people who are trying to get over people they lost during the pandemic? Because I feel like, and if I'm wrong, you can let me know. I feel like that kind of sits differently because of how these people passed away. So what would you say and about that?
I think the pandemic created a lot of individuals with complicated grief. And so I think, let me back up a little bit. So with palliative care, part of what we do is, support people. Sometimes, of course, we believe that palliative care is beneficial at any stage in illness, but a lot of our work is at end of life for people who have to make difficult decisions. And sometimes it could be really quickly. And a lot of that happened, of course, in the pandemic, because people are forced to make decisions that they hadn't thought about before, right? So things happen really quickly. Do I leave them on a ventilator? Do I not? Do I, what decisions do I make very quickly? And so I think the pandemic created a lot of space where families have complicated grief, because the things that we normally do in order to grieve or send a loved one off were, for the vast majority of the pandemic, we could not do. So, for example, when a loved one's sick in the hospital, you go and you sit with them at their bedside. You can do that. If a loved one is going to take their last breath in the hospital or wherever, or even sometimes we bring them home on hospice. For some patients, if they were COVID positive, you couldn't do that. Or, there were challenges to doing that sometimes. Or if they were going to take their last breath, usually they could do it on and you'd be at the bedside and with the family if you were aware that was going to happen. No, you have to be sometimes on an iPad to do that early on in the pandemic. And so it created a lot of complicated grief, because what we do, even when we think about funerals, you couldn't have funerals with your whole family there. Black people got big old families, so only
No,
10
we got cut
people
up.
there,
It's a month that we
right?
cut up.
So can't have that time. So the memorial and send off that you would have normally had for someone whose life you wanted to honor, you couldn't have it in the manner that you wanted to.
Right.
And so it created a lot of complicated grief for people because the things that we do to help us process the loss could not happen.
Yes.
And then I also think part of what complicated the grief of the pandemic is that community is also what helps us to process the grief that we're in, right?
Yeah.
Like being able to be
Yes.
our church families or our neighbors to comfort us in the loss, but then we couldn't congregate. They couldn't come see us. We couldn't,
Yeah.
ain't nobody had no repast. Like you
Yeah.
can't do
Yeah.
that because it's the middle of a pandemic. And so
And
all of
good
the
food
things,
helps the heart. I don't care what you say.
yes, all the
Good.
things that we would normally do, we couldn't do. And so
Yeah.
we're left to try to hold our grief alone. And so I see both sides, right? I see it as a palliative care provider before we have loss, but then in private practice, I support families who are grieving. And a lot of what I heard was just the unresolved feelings because things went so quickly, or, people were concerned about, well, I was the one who was exposed first, but I didn't die, or,
Yes.
if I
Yes.
just hadn't gone there, or we hadn't done this, or
Mhm.
what, and all of the complications that come generally with grief anyway. I say all the time is that we have to grieve because grief is the price that we pay for love, but we don't have to be left with guilt.
Wow.
And so
Good. That's
I saw a
good.
lot of guilt because of decision making. We didn't have conversations that we needed to have. So then, did I do the right thing, or you did the wrong thing and you shouldn't have done that, and they should have, so it's just so complicated. So our people are left with, in the midst of that, the racial trauma that happens in the midst of the pandemic, with all of that, with George Floyd's death. And then you add on to that also the COVID concerns that our people are dying at a higher rate. So then there's questions about whether or not they received adequate care. And I wasn't there to advocate for mama. So did that mean that she got what she needed? So you add all of these things together and you see our people almost at a state of crisis in the midst of a pandemic.
I love it. You said something that was so profound. I'm gonna make a meme out of it tomorrow. So get ready. It's gonna be on my timeline, and just go ahead and screenshot it and post it. But it's one of the most profound things that people need to hear in this pandemic. It makes me a little emotional. And you say we have to grieve because grief is the price we pay for love. Since that was philosophical. I mean, my goodness.
I wish it was mine, but it's not.
Okay, but you brought it to us today. That's my first.
But the rest is mine.
It's amazing. However, we don't have to live in guilt. That's absolutely profound and amazing, because what it does is give us the ability to look at where we are now and say, how do I move forward? But I also look at it as a concept for how do we handle relationships going forward. When you say we don't have to live in guilt, so then how do I avoid this in the future if I did experience sudden loss during the pandemic? How does it affect the way that I deal with relationships going forward?
So
it's still so amazing to me to just think of the idea of having, and I'm saying this seriously, a Black female therapist who can help people cope with grief because of how much grief tends to affect our community. And you talked about all those things, how we usually have the church, holding us together, how we usually have friends and family who are coming by to look out for us, how having all the cousins you haven't seen in 15 years coming out to jump on the casket is a part of what we do. Somebody's gonna holler, "Take me, Lord, take me!" But that's all a part of how we love and support each other and live as a part of that close knitness that we have not been able to have over the past year, and it is going to affect people differently. For those who are working in the medical profession, what would you say about them? Because losing all of these people time and time again, and some of the things that they have had to see, and even losing colleagues. We know that there have been medical professionals who have passed away as well. What would you say about them?
So I want to go back and say something about church. So remind me, don't let me forget that. But I think for health professionals, I think when I actually spoke at a palliative care conference in the midst of the pandemic, and one of the things I talked about was soul injury. And moral injury. And what that looks like, usually moral injury was kind of studied with veterans, right? Where they did things that were against their moral belief, or they had internal injury from the work that they had to do, but that was their job they signed up for. And it's really similar to look at it kind of as a phenomenon with healthcare providers in the midst of this pandemic. Really, not only do we handle the normal weight of our roles, comes with the idea of having to handle some grief and loss in the weight of our role. We understand that, right? That is part of it, is a professional hazard. It is known. Right. But to have loss of this magnitude, where you are dealing with the losses of life at such high rates so quickly, but then also with the concern of your safety. Normally, when we're thinking about losing a patient, we're not thinking about how does even serving this patient impact my life and now my family's. But in the pandemic, we have to consider those things. So it's this two-edged sword where you have to make a decision. Do I show up for people and serve them as part of my assignment and deal with all of this loss, but also deal with the weight of the risk that just because I'm here, I have now placed myself at risk and potentially my family. Right? So they're thinking about their well-being, their family's well-being, and then also the hours, the time, it's taxing. And so we have seen an increase in emotional and burnout and, fatigue in healthcare professionals because of the exacerbation of all of these things just layered on top of each other. I'm working on a project and I've seen it in other places where we talk about emotional PPE for healthcare professionals, where it's like, what is the emotional personal protection equipment that really now we have to consider for healthcare professionals? Because if we continue at this rate, we all gonna be crazy. We're not gonna have any capacity to serve anybody.
I agree.
Because we will be burnt out. We won't have it. And so we have to look at how we take care of our healthcare professionals differently, who have no choice but to show up and serve for these people. I've seen people I've known who've been in this field forever, just like, you know what? Yeah, I'm not doing it anymore. And so how do we make sure that the business of healthcare also concerns itself of making sure that you can, you're taking care of the providers as well. And so it's hard. I've seen a lot of support groups pop up for healthcare professionals. Every good therapist I know has a therapist, because therapists are holding spaces for people while they're in them. Like, things don't stop happening to us because we're therapists. And I've said before, like, my grandmother passed away about almost 2 years ago. And I'm a grieving grief therapist. And so life doesn't stop happening just because I have a license.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's awesome. That's right. That's absolutely right. I love it. So there are so many other things we could say.
Oh, wait, I want to say something about church.
Yes, that was it. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things I say often is that the church is a beautiful place for community, but it can be harmful and catastrophic when we are grieving. I see so many people who come and are grieving, but also can't even grieve because they're having to deal with their church hurt while losing their person they love. Or even with the illness, are dealing with church hurt as a result of that. And what I mean by that is we have all of these colorful cliches and things we say to people when they're hurting, like, God wanted them best, or, if you have faith, then you should just rejoice because they in heaven. Okay, in theory, yes. Okay, heaven is the goal, all right? But today my heart is sad. Today I have sorrow. The human part of me is mourning and missing someone. So how dare you question my faith because I'm grieving? And so we make it look like all the human emotions that come with us can't be present, and we have faith. And so I just wanted to speak to that because I think that's a space that the church could do so much better if we learn how to adequately support the grieving. The Bible talks about care for the widow, but like if we adequately learn to care for our grieving and not harm them. I even heard, like, in the midst of the pandemic, people would say stuff like, well, God has me covered, or, that's, people have to pray harder.
Well, I was in a store yesterday and I was like bucking my eyes as I heard a woman telling another woman, because, if the Lord called you to go, then you just gonna go and there's nothing you can do about it. But the Lord, but the Bible also says obedience is better than sacrifice. So sis, If you're not following the advice that's given to you, then you're choosing a sacrifice, and not you're choosing a sacrifice of obedience, and that's on you. So it's so interesting that you said that, because I actually heard somebody like
people say all kind of stuff. They say all kind of stuff. Like if
like what? No,
listen. But go ahead, I'm sorry. No, I agree. People say all kind of stuff, and I think it's harmful. Like I have a client who's grieving, had a client who was grieving the loss of a sibling, and she told me that, at the right after the funeral, one of the things that somebody said to her was that, if she just had got her life right with the Lord sooner, then she would have had more time. And I literally had to try to contain my emotions, because I was like, where is and I think we have to say all of these things with good intentions, or, just keep the faith, keep trusting. Yes, keep the faith, keep trusting, keep holding on. But also, I see you and I hear you. And the absence, the two are mutually exclusive. You can love the Lord and trust him and grieve. Jesus wept. And if we didn't need a comforter, he wouldn't have come.
Come on now. Don't lay me out on the floor. Amen. And this is what I was thinking about. This is also why it's so urgently important for our church to build a stronger community with our mental health community. It's so necessary, because there are, I'm about to say something. Good thing I don't care if folks get upset.
Listen, I stay getting in trouble. We're going to just go there together.
We need we have a lot of preachers who are not who are doing two things. You preach in the spirit, but you don't operate in the true knowledge of Christ. Okay. And then you also are preaching in the flesh, and you are not educating yourself as well. And so a lot of times people think that being quote unquote called is a substitute for you being having knowledge. Okay. And so it is my belief that the more skillful, so I accept that God has called me as a writer and speaker. Without a doubt, I've known it all of my days. But when I knew that in order for me to be the best writer and speaker possible, I needed to study that some more in college. I needed to gain access to the tools that make me more skillful in what I do and more knowledgeable. When I became a teacher, I knew I needed to constantly go through professional development that was not always about ELA. You see what I'm saying? Because you could pretty much know ELA. You know it, then you know it. But working with my students and families, right? How to use better skills in the classroom, right? Even from the mental health aspect, how to know when my student needs more help. How do I cope with in-class trauma? Social emotional learning is what we call it, right? In order to help elevate me to become the best teacher I could possibly be, and to strengthen my skill and reachability as a writer and speaker. Therefore, if I'm called into the ministry of God and I'm writing my own sermons, nothing will help me better than having a couple of classes under my belt that strengthen my writing and comprehension skills. Nothing will help me understand empathy and compassion better than taking a couple of courses or going to therapy myself to understand more about human emotions. And so I think it is imperative that our church acknowledges the necessity of building a stronger relationship with our mental health community to really be able to help our members. And it's not saying that, we got a whole bunch of folks getting theology degrees and thinking that a theology degree makes you a therapist, and it doesn't.
We have to be able to hire out our deficiencies. One of the things I love about my pastor is that he will bring a therapist on the stage to sit in the middle of a sermon, and they have a joint sermon where he is talking about what the Bible says, and they are talking about what science and research says about the mind, and what emotional theories say about how we manage and process. And the reason I think that's so powerful is because I believe there is space for spiritual counsel. I believe there are some things that only a pastor or someone who is spiritually inclined can help us process.
Exactly.
Having said that, I believe that if you don't have the skill set, sometimes you can do harm to people who are trying to process and live through trauma, grief, and loss. And I think we can use the Bible thinking that we are soothing and supporting and comforting them when really in turn what we are doing is harming them. And that is not of God. If we are not speaking love and life to someone when they
Come
are
on.
broken,
Come
then I
on.
don't care what words came out of your mouth, that is not of God.
I don't know if you preaching or therapizing right now. I just made up a whole word. I don't know. But this is the crazy part about it, okay? Every time I've listened to something that's supposed to be of the world, even science, I find validation in the word of God. It's already in the world. It already in the word. See what I'm saying? So if we see the power of coming together with people, because if my therapist is in my church, my therapist is saved too, right? So imagine if I could bring this person in and we are looking from my expertise as a pastor, their expertise as a therapist. Oh my gosh, it is explosive capabilities.
Yeah.
You
But I
know,
think
like
so
it
many
gives
people
me
don't
chills
want
to
to,
think about what could happen.
yeah, and I think so many people don't want to step into that space because in order to get to that space, we have to say that we've done our work too, or we are doing our work too. And so many people don't want to get into the space where we talk about emotional wellness and processing our trauma and dealing with the things because we just say that we've handed those things to to the Lord. But really, the reality is that we can give to the Lord what is His, but the human part of us has to process that too. And so, because there are things that we still have the physical scars, right? God is a healer, He is a miracle worker, but the human part of us has to process some of those things. And so, I think personally, and I could be completely wrong, but some of us don't want to step into the space where we have to talk about, well, how mentally well are you? Because then that means that we have to call out the things that we got in going on
Yes.
in us that
Yes.
requires some process
Yep.
too that we don't touch. We just act like
Yep.
not there. Until the
Yes.
people in our homes, that's how you see
Yes.
places where you have pastors or leaders who give this amazing display, but in their homes, the people are broken.
They're going through. Yes. 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 you absolutely. And what you said is spot on. We do have to start dealing with all our brokenness, but you know what? I don't believe that people can really fully be healed, or any audience or any group. Just like I couldn't be an effective teacher without first admitting my deficiencies in areas that I needed strength. I don't believe that we can be effective as well in any of our ministries without acknowledging our deficiencies so we can
Right.
work to improve them. And even in our, when we talk about church mental health, acknowledging that people are not going to be critical of you whenever you start to work on improving. People feel critical of you whenever you don't even acknowledge that it's there, and they need you to be better so that they can be better.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right. I just think about that explosive partnership. Even in the education, I always think about that. I remember the year I had the chance to teach Vacation Bible School. I actually did Vacation Bible School one year, and the greatest part of having fun about that was I was thinking about how I could use thinking maps for Bible school lessons, and how I could use deeper thinking to ask different level questions, tiered thinking, and differentiated instruction with our kids, right? So imagine if we took those same teaching strategies we use in the classroom and use those to teach our kids the Word of God. And so they're Bible philosophers at a much early, at an earlier age. Even those critical writing skills, right? If we started teaching those skills in the same capacity in church, that we want them to know them in school. And so if we are able to build in a sense of partnership where everybody in our church is essential.
Yeah.
Everybody in our church has value. Everybody in our church is playing an important role. Then it changes really how we are bringing the word of God across the people, and it changes the overall atmosphere. And I think it could be a great aid in driving down the mental health issues we see that go untalked about until there's a tragedy.
But you know what? I think part of that, and I think somebody just dropped it in here, and I was going to say that. I think the reality is that in order to do all of those things, we have to learn to be transparent. There is power
Yeah.
in vulnerability. And I think
Yeah.
what happens is that We don't want to look like I got stuff because that makes me a better Christian than Susie. I don't want to look like I have these things or this struggle or sadness or depression or anxiety because I want to look like I got Jesus on the main line and I'm telling him what I want. And so if I got depression, it may not come off as true. And so we have all of these things that we go through in private where we're laying on our face and submitting ourselves to God and we're calling out to him. But had we been vulnerable and transparent enough in public, not only would we get our healing, but we could help somebody along the way. But we sit in church and we sit at these walls and we act like we're not human having these human experiences. So we teach our children that part of the goal is to be a Bible scholar and not really to be able to apply the biblical principles to life. Yes. And so that's why you have people who grow up can quote all the scriptures, but can't apply not nan one to life.
Not nan.
Not nan.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. You know, so we're going to put a pin in it here because first I want to start by expressing that tonight has been everything I thought it would be and then some. So I want to thank you. And let me first ask, is there anything else that you want to share tonight? You know, my schedule is open. I don't care. I've tried to be respectful of the fact that it's Memorial Day. That's what I was trying to be nice about.
Listen, my little people, I can hear them moving around upstairs. So I think they daddy putting them in the bed. But I think one thing I would like to just say is that mental health is for everyone. And as a body, as people, as a community, we have to learn to nurture and protect and to help each other heal. We have to be able to create spaces where someone can say, I am not okay, and then not judge them for not being okay. And then not be, you know, once something happened to them, be like, oh, somebody should have been there for them. But no, when people are saying they're not okay, you're like, oh, she trying to get attention. She always attention seeking. So we have to make space for people to be able to say they're not okay and then really truly show up for them if they're not. And then I think as individuals, we have to be willing to step into spaces. And if no one shows up for you and honors what you are, that you show up in spaces for yourself and get you some help and get you a safe space with a therapist, a clinician, that will help you process what you've been through, where you're going. Because although we are, you know, God can open any kind of door for us, but a lot of times we have doors that open to us, so we don't have the character or the emotional fortitude or emotional intelligence to stay in the spaces that he's called us to because we haven't done our work. And so I don't want to see us miss out on opportunities because we got anxiety or imposter syndrome or depression stop us from going into those spaces. Get you to somebody that can help you process that. Listen, I'm a therapist with a therapist. I believe in therapy. So just make sure that get you some Jesus and see you a therapist, okay?
Yep. I love it. I love it. She said, get you some Jesus and see a therapist. I just want to thank you so much for coming on tonight and for all you hit the head on some really, really powerful points that I don't feel we can discuss enough. Mental health among our kids, mental health among our professionals, right? Especially during the pandemic, how to overcome the grief during the pandemic, Black women coping with mental health. You really hit some nails on the head tonight. And let me express that I hope you will be open to coming back in a group panel in the future, because I have decided I definitely want to have the opportunity for the Black Women Roundtable to come at least twice a year, because it's so imperative. And every time we have that conversation together, the energy that I get from folks is just awesome. And I think I would love to bring you in, because I think it's been at least 2 conversations where we had the women and you were just dropping those jewels in the comments. And so I thank you, first of all, for coming tonight to help us close out Mental Health Awareness Month, because we must continue to keep these conversations going forward. We must look out for each other. We must encourage and support each other. And we must encourage people to seek professionally trained help.
Yes.
Number 2, as I said before, I look forward to more conversations with you in the future, and hoping that we can just continue to share your voice with people who need to know about the intellectualism and power among Black women and the Black community, and how helpful it is not just to Black folks but to the world. So I thank you so much for coming on tonight. I don't even have a poem today because I wanted to make sure that I used up every minute I could since we backed a few minutes off. It ended up an hour and a half anyway. And so, I will be sharing some clips of the video on our social media page, and the replay will be available on YouTube. So if you have not subscribed to our channel, please do, so that you can revisit this interview or discussion, as well as the discussions we have coming up during June. As you all know, honey, June is Juneteenth month. So I'm trying to get us lined up with some fantastic people on board. And once again, we want to continue to encourage people that if you are having any feelings of being overwhelmed, worried, concerned, you feel like you're in this slump you just can't get out of, or just kind of not knowing what you feel, but knowing you don't feel like yourself, please know that there are professionals that can help you. You can find, how can they find you on social media, Ms. Broussard?
So I am Stephanie BB all across social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I am Stephanie BB. And then also I have a podcast. It's called It Comes with Living, and it's everywhere podcasts are found. And so I'd love for you to tune in and subscribe and rate and all those things.
So please come back when you get a minute and put all your links in the comments on Facebook, if you don't mind, so that people can connect with you if they like. And so we look forward to hearing more from you all in the future. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have a good night.
Thanks for having me.